They told me don't bother showing up, but the lawyer announced the inheritance skipped everyone else to me. I stood in the cramped, dimly lit office of Harper & Sons law firm, my heart pounding so loud I swore everyone could hear it. The air smelled of old coffee and dusty files, and the tension was thick enough to choke on. My cousins, aunts, and uncles crowded around the polished oak table, their eyes darting between me and the lawyer, Mr. Harper, who clutched a manila envelope like it was a bomb about to go off. I shouldn't have been there. They made that clear. "Don't bother showing up, Ella," my cousin Rachel had sneered over the phone just days ago. "You're not getting a dime." But there I was, hands trembling, staring at the smug faces of my family, who'd spent years treating me like an outsider. And then Mr. Harper cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "The estate of Margaret Thompson," he said, "has been designated entirely to Ella Marie Thompson." Gasps. A chair scraped. Rachel's face went white, her mouth half open like a fish out of water. My Uncle Tom slammed his fist on the table, muttering, "This is a mistake." I couldn't breathe. Me? Everything? Grandma's house, her savings, the land, everything she'd worked her whole life for, was mine. I wanted to laugh, cry, or maybe scream, but all I could do was stand there, frozen, as their glares burned holes into me. Hey, before we dive deeper into this mess, let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from? Your city, your country? I'm curious to see how far this story travels. All right, let's get back to it. I wasn't supposed to be the one standing here, inheriting Grandma's legacy. I was the quiet one, the one who didn't fight for attention, who didn't beg for scraps of approval. My family, well, they'd made it clear I was barely a Thompson. But Grandma, she saw me. And now, in this stuffy room in upstate New York, with the weight of their shock pressing down on me, I realized she'd seen more than I ever knew. How did it come to this? How did a family that once shared Sunday dinners end up tearing each other apart over money and land? Let me take you back to where it all started unraveling. Growing up in our small town of Willow Creek, New York, family was everything. At least that's what I thought. Grandma Margaret was the glue. Her old Victorian house on Maple Street was where we'd all gather. Me, my parents, my older sister Lily, and a gaggle of cousins, aunts, and uncles. Sunday dinners were loud, chaotic, filled with laughter over her famous pot roast. I was the youngest, always trailing behind, helping Grandma in the kitchen while the others argued over who'd get the biggest slice of pie. "You're my little helper, Ella," she'd say, winking as she slipped me an extra cookie. Those moments felt like home, but there was always a shadow over those dinners. My dad, Grandma's only son, passed away when I was 10, a car accident that left Mom and me struggling to keep up with the mortgage. Lily was already in college, chasing her big city dreams, so it was just me and Mom. The rest of the family? They drifted. Aunt Susan, Grandma's sister, would swoop in with her kids, Rachel and Mark, acting like they owned the place. They'd talk about Grandma's land, her savings, like it was already theirs. "Mama's getting old," Aunt Susan would whisper to Mom. "She needs us to take care of things." Mom would just nod, too tired to argue. I saw it, though, the way they'd size up Grandma's house, her antique furniture, like vultures circling. Rachel was the worst. She was 5 years older, always flashing her perfect smile and her perfect life. New car, fancy job in Albany. She'd breeze into town, kiss Grandma's cheek, and leave after an hour, claiming she was so busy. Meanwhile, I was the one driving Grandma to doctor's appointments, picking up her groceries, listening to her stories about Grandpa and their farm. I didn't do it for a reward. I did it because she was my rock. But Rachel, she'd call me the errand girl behind my back, laughing with Mark about how I was wasting my life in Willow Creek. The favoritism stung, but I swallowed it. Grandma never played favorites. She'd scold Rachel for skipping visits, tell Mark to stop whining about his job. But after Dad died, the family dynamic shifted. Aunt Susan started pushing Grandma to get her affairs in order, and I'd catch her and Rachel whispering about fair shares when they thought I wasn't listening. Mom warned me to stay out of it. "They're family, Ella," she'd say, "but money changes people." I didn't want to believe her. I thought family meant loyalty, not greed. But as Grandma's health started fading last year, the whispers got louder, and I started feeling like I didn't belong at my own family's table. By the time Grandma passed, I was 28, working as a nurse's aide, still living in our little rental house with Mom. I'd spent years caring for Grandma, holding her hand through chemo, reading her old romance novels when she couldn't sleep. The rest of the family? They showed up for the big moments, Christmas, her birthday, but they were ghosts when it came to the hard stuff. Still, I never imagined they'd try to cut me out completely. Not until the funeral, when the real battle began. The air at Grandma Margaret's funeral felt heavy, like a storm was brewing. It was a crisp October morning in Willow Creek, and St. Mary's Church was packed with familiar faces, neighbors, old friends, and of course, the family. I stood near the front, clutching a crumpled tissue, my eyes fixed on Grandma's mahogany casket, draped in white roses. Her face, so peaceful in the open casket, didn't match the chaos around me. The organ played softly, but it couldn't drown out the whispers rippling through the pews. I caught snippets. My name, Ella, hissed with a tone that made my stomach twist. Rachel and Aunt Susan sat 2 rows ahead, their heads bent together, murmuring. Mark slouched beside them, kept glancing back at me, his smirk barely hidden. I tried to focus on the eulogy, on the memories of Grandma's laugh, her warm hugs, but the tension was suffocating. After the service at the cemetery, it got worse. As we gathered around the grave, Aunt Susan grabbed my arm, her nails digging in just enough to sting. "Ella, you don't need to stick around for the reception," she said, her voice syrupy but sharp. "We've got it handled." Rachel, standing nearby, chimed in, "Yeah, you've done enough already, haven't you?" Her tone dripped with sarcasm, like I'd been a burden instead of the one who'd bathed Grandma, fed her, sat with her through endless nights. I forced a smile, my throat tight. "I'm staying," I said quietly, brushing past them. Their eyes followed me, cold and calculating. At the reception, held in Grandma's old house, the air was thick with fake tears and forced smiles. The living room smelled of coffee and casseroles, neighbors milling about with plates of food. I stood in the corner, holding a glass of water, watching my family work the room like politicians. Rachel was loudest, telling anyone who'd listen how devastated she was, how she'd always been there for Grandma. I wanted to scream. Always there? She hadn't visited in months. But every time I moved, someone, Mark, Aunt Susan, even my distant cousin Linda, shot me a look, like I was an intruder in my own grandmother's home. "You must be exhausted, Ella," Linda said, her voice laced with pity. "All that caretaking. You should rest." It wasn't concern. It was a jab, a reminder that they saw me as the help, not family. Then came the moment that cut deepest. I overheard Rachel at the dessert table, her voice low but clear. "Ella thinks she's entitled to something," she said to Mark, popping a brownie in her mouth. Like she earned it by playing nurse. Grandma wasn't stupid. She knew who really mattered. Mark chuckled, and my chest burned. I slipped out to the porch, the cold air hitting my face, tears stinging my eyes. They didn't just want Grandma's money. They wanted to erase me from her story. The next day, we were called to Harper & Sons for a preliminary meeting about Grandma's estate. It wasn't the official will reading yet, just a discussion, according to Mr. Harper's email. I almost didn't go. Mom, who'd been quiet since the funeral, urged me to show up. "You were her heart, Ella," she said, squeezing my hand. "Don't let them push you out." So I went, my stomach in knots, expecting a fight. The law office was small, with faded wallpaper and a creaky fan. Mr. Harper, a wiry man in his 60s, sat at the head of the table, his glasses perched low on his nose. Rachel, Mark, Aunt Susan, and a few other cousins filled the chairs, their postures stiff like they were ready to pounce. I took a seat at the far end, feeling like a kid called to the principal's office. Mr. Harper shuffled papers, avoiding eye contact. "We're here to review Margaret's wishes," he started, his voice oddly hesitant. "There are complexities to discuss." Rachel leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "Complexities?" she asked, like she already knew the answer. I noticed something strange then. Mr. Harper's hands shook slightly as he opened the folder. He kept glancing at me just for a second before looking away. It wasn't much, but it felt off. like he was holding something back. Aunt Susan jumped in, her voice sharp. Let's just get to it, Richard. We all know Mama wanted the estate split fairly. Fairly? The word hung in the air, heavy with her meaning. Fairly for them, not me. I stayed quiet, my fingers twisting the hem of my sweater. Then came the hint that changed everything. As Mr. Harper droned on about legal terms, probate, assets, something about the land, I caught a murmur from the corner. It was Mrs. Delaney, Grandma's old neighbor, who'd been invited for reasons no one explained. She was ancient, her hands trembling as she leaned toward me. Margaret was clever, Ella, she whispered, her voice barely audible. She left something. Just for you. I froze, my heart skipping. What? I whispered back, but she just patted my hand and looked away, like she'd said too much. Rachel's head snapped toward us, her eyes narrowing, but she didn't hear. My mind raced. What did Mrs. Delaney know? And why was Mr. Harper acting so cagey? I didn't have answers, but for the first time I felt a spark of hope. Maybe Grandma hadn't forgotten me after all. Sitting in that law office with Mrs. Delaney's cryptic words echoing in my head, I couldn't help but drift back to the moments that shaped this mess. Growing up, I always felt like the odd one out in the Thompson family. After Dad died, it was like I became invisible to everyone except Grandma Margaret. I'd spend hours at her house, curled up on her worn couch, listening to her stories about the old days, how she and Grandpa built their life from nothing, turning a scrappy piece of land into a home filled with love. She'd pat my hand and say, "You've got his heart, Ella," meaning Dad. Those words kept me going when the rest of the family treated me like I didn't belong. But the memories that stung most were the ones where I saw the cracks forming. I was maybe 16 when I overheard Aunt Susan at a family barbecue, her voice low as she talked to Rachel by the grill. "Ella's just like her mom, always clinging to Mama's apron strings," she said, laughing. "She'll never amount to much." Rachel snickered, flipping her hair, and I hid behind the shed, my face burning. I wanted to yell, to tell them I was the one who mowed Grandma's lawn, who fixed her leaky faucet when Mark couldn't be bothered. But I didn't. I just swallowed it, like always. Years later, when Grandma got sick, I was the one there. I'd drive 40 minutes after my shifts at the nursing home to check on her, sometimes falling asleep in the chair by her bed. I'd read her those cheesy romance novels she loved, her eyes lighting up even when the chemo left her weak. One night she grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You're my rock, Ella," she whispered. "Don't let them tell you otherwise." I thought she meant Mom or Lily, who'd moved to Chicago by then. Now, I wondered if she meant the whole family. Meanwhile, Rachel and Mark would show up for the big moments. Christmas, they'd roll in with expensive wine, acting like they were doing Grandma a favor. Rachel once brought a real estate agent to look at the land, claiming it was for Grandma's future planning. I caught them measuring the backyard, talking about subdividing it for condos. When I told Grandma, she laughed it off, but her eyes were sharp. "They think they know everything," she said, shaking her head. I didn't realize then how much she saw, how much she was planning. Those memories flooded back as I sat in Mr. Harper's office, Rachel's smug smile burning into me. I'd spent years being the quiet one, the one who didn't fight back, who let their jabs slide. But Grandma's words, "You're my rock," kept me grounded. Whatever Mrs. Delaney meant, whatever secret was hiding, I had to believe Grandma hadn't left me to fight alone. A week after that tense meeting, we were back at Harper & Sons for the official will reading. The room felt smaller this time, the air thick with expectation. Rachel sat at the front, her designer purse perched on the table like a trophy. Aunt Susan was beside her, arms crossed, her lips a tight line. Mark slouched in his chair, scrolling on his phone, but his eyes flicked up every few seconds, watching Mr. Harper like a hawk. I sat near the back, Mom next to me, her hand squeezing mine under the table. My heart was racing, Mrs. Delaney's whisper still nagging at me. "Something just for you." I wanted to believe it, but doubt gnawed at me. What if Rachel was right? What if I'd been fooling myself, thinking I mattered? Mr. Harper cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Let's begin," he said, his voice steady but tense. He opened the envelope, pulling out a thick document. This is the last will and testament of Margaret Thompson, dated 6 months ago. 6 months. That was right after her last hospital stay, when I'd spent nights by her side. Rachel leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. Aunt Susan gave her a small nod, like they'd already won. He started reading, his voice droning through legal jargon. Debts to be settled, small bequests to the church, a donation to the local library. Then he got to the estate, the house, the 10 acres of land, her savings. My stomach twisted as he paused, his eyes scanning the page. The bulk of the estate, he said, including the property and all financial assets, is to be divided among Margaret's surviving heirs. He hesitated, and Rachel's smile widened. My heart sank. This was it. The moment they'd been waiting for. The moment I'd lose everything. With the exception of the primary beneficiary, Mr. Harper continued. The room went dead silent. Rachel's smile froze. Aunt Susan's head snapped up. The primary beneficiary, he said, looking straight at me, is Ella Marie Thompson, to whom Margaret leaves the entirety of her estate, excluding minor bequests. A gasp ripped through the room. Rachel's chair scraped back, her face twisting. What? She snapped, her voice shrill. That's impossible! Mark's phone clattered to the table, his jaw slack. Aunt Susan stared at Mr. Harper, her face red, like she could will the words to change. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Me, all of it, the house, the land, the money. Grandma gave it to me? The silence was deafening, broken only by Rachel's ragged breathing. She turned to me, her eyes blazing. You manipulated her, she hissed. You tricked a dying old woman. Mom squeezed my hand harder, but I couldn't look away from Mr. Harper, who held up a hand for silence. There's more, he said, his voice firm. My heart pounded. More? The room felt like it was closing in. Every pair of eyes locked on Mr. Harper as he adjusted his glasses and held up a single sheet of paper, separate from the will. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst. Rachel's glare burned into me, her lips pressed into a thin, furious line. Aunt Susan gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, while Mark muttered something under his breath, shaking his head. Mom's hand was still on mine, steadying me, but I could barely feel it. There's more, Mr. Harper had said. What could possibly come next? This is a letter, Mr. Harper began, his voice calm but deliberate. Written by Margaret Thompson, to be read alongside her will. He cleared his throat and started reading. To my family, I've loved you all, but love doesn't mean turning a blind eye. Ella has been my heart and my strength. She was there when I was sick, when I was scared, when I needed someone to listen. She never asked for anything, but she gave everything. The rest of you... He paused, glancing up nervously. Rachel's face was a mask of shock, her eyes wide. The rest of you, he continued, came when it suited you, when there was something to gain. I'm leaving my estate to Ella because she's earned it, not with greed, but with loyalty. A stunned silence swallowed the room. Then chaos erupted. Rachel shot to her feet, her chair clattering to the floor. This is insane, she shouted, her voice cracking. She was sick. She wasn't thinking straight. Ella brainwashed her. Aunt Susan joined in, her voice shrill. This isn't legal. We'll contest it. Mark just stared at the table, his face pale like he'd been slapped. I sat there frozen, Grandma's words washing over me. She was there when I was scared. I could still see her frail hand in mine, her smile when I'd read to her. She'd known. She'd seen it all. Mr. Harper raised a hand, his voice cutting through the noise. There's one final clause, he said, and the room went quiet again. Margaret included a provision. If any beneficiary contests the will, they forfeit their share of the minor bequests, $5,000 each to Susan, Rachel, and Mark. Rachel's mouth snapped shut, her eyes darting to her mother. Aunt Susan's face crumpled like she'd been punched. The minor bequests were nothing compared to the estate, the house, the land, the savings, but it was all they were getting, and now even that was at risk. Mr. Harper folded the letter, his expression unreadable. That's all, he said. Ella, I'll need you to stay to sign some papers. Rachel spun toward me, her voice low and venomous. You think you've won? This isn't over. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, Aunt Susan trailing behind her, muttering about lawyers. Mark lingered, his eyes meeting mine for a moment. Something like shame flickered there before he followed them out. The room emptied, leaving just me, Mom, and Mr. Harper. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding, tears stinging my eyes. Grandma hadn't just given me her estate, she'd given me her voice, her truth. The weeks that followed were a blur. I moved into Grandma's house, the old Victorian on Maple Street, with its creaky floors and familiar smell of lavender. It felt like coming home, but it wasn't easy. Rachel and Aunt Susan didn't contest the will, probably scared of losing their $5 but they didn't speak to me either. At the grocery store, Rachel would turn down another aisle if she saw me. Mark sent a single text. "Sorry, Ella. Didn't know." I didn't reply. Mom said to let them go. That family isn't just blood. It's who shows up. She was right, but it still hurt. The neighbors, though, were different. Mrs. Delaney came by with a casserole and a smile saying, "Margaret would be proud of you." Others stopped by too, sharing stories of how Grandma had bragged about me, her little helper, who never gave up on her. I didn't flaunt the inheritance. I paid off Mom's mortgage, set aside money for a community garden Grandma always wanted, and kept working as a nurse's aide. The money didn't change me. It just gave me breathing room, a chance to honor her memory. Looking back, I realized Grandma's gift wasn't just the house or the land, it was the lesson. Family isn't about who demands the most or shouts the loudest. It's about who's there in the quiet moments, the hard ones, when no one's watching. I'd spent years feeling like I didn't belong, but Grandma saw me, and in the end, she made sure everyone else did too. Hey, thanks for sticking with my story. If it hit home for you, hit that subscribe button. It means the world to keep sharing these tales. And drop a comment below. Ever had a family moment that turned everything upside down? Or maybe just tell me what you thought of Grandma's big move. I'm reading, everyone.